Leyland Roadtrain, which has been zooming across our TV screens practically every night lately.
The Leyland Roadtrain was supposed to be it, the comeback kid, the bold British-built big rig that was meant to go toe-to-toe with the Volvos and Scanias flooding in from Europe. When Leyland rolled it out in the early 80s, they weren't just launching a new truck, they were making a statement. This was Britain's answer to the Continental giants, a modern, angular, heavy-hauling brute designed to haul freight and restore national pride in a homegrown haulier. For a moment, it almost worked. Almost. You've got to remember the backdrop here. The late 70s and early 80s were a rough time for British manufacturing. The lorry industry was in a right mess. Leyland was losing ground, the market was shifting fast, and foreign trucks were creeping into every yard in the country. Drivers were falling in love with the quiet cabins and smooth pulls of the Scanias. Operators wanted trucks that didn't break down every other week, and while Bedford and ERF were doing what they could, the big money was leaving the island. Leyland knew it needed something fresh, something strong, something modern. Enter the Roadtrain. It looked the part, that's for sure. With its sharp lines, big rectangular headlights, and that unmistakably boxy cab, it stood out. It wasn't pretty, but it had presence. A no-nonsense look that said, "I'm here to work," and underneath that cab, a decent power plant, initially the Rolls-Royce 290 and later the Cummins L10. These were proper engines with enough torque to get a full load moving without sounding like it was coughing up a lung, and it didn't stop there. Leyland gave it air suspension, improved cabs, and even a sleeper version. For a British truck, it was starting to feel almost continental. Drivers had mixed feelings, some loved it straight away. It felt tougher than older Leylands, the ride was smoother, the noise levels were down, and in a sleeper version, you could actually get a half-decent kip if you parked up at T-Bay for the night. But others weren't so convinced. It was still a bit plasticky inside. The wiring had that classic British personality, meaning it worked when it felt like it. And the gearbox could be a pig if you weren't firm with it. Still, for a brief spell, it felt like Leyland might be onto something. Operators liked the numbers, the Roadtrain wasn't as expensive as the imports, and parts were easier to get. Plus, it kept blokes in jobs across Britain, from the production lines in Lancashire to the depots in the Midlands. It was a lorry that mattered. You'd see fleets of them with British firms, big names and independents alike, decked out in company colours, with drivers proud to sit behind the wheel. But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Leyland, despite its best efforts, was already fighting an uphill battle. Reliability still wasn't where it needed to be. Fuel economy lagged behind the Continental competition. And while the Roadtrain tried its best to keep up, the pace of innovation from Volvo, Scania, and even MAN was relentless. Their trucks were quieter, more comfortable, and more refined. You didn't have to wrestle the gearbox. The aircon worked, the heating actually got warm in winter, and slowly but surely, British hauliers started drifting away. The real turning point came with the Leyland DAF merger. Now, DAF was already making serious waves in Europe. Their 2800 series had built up a massive following, and they had newer, better platforms on the way. Leyland's offerings, including the Roadtrain, suddenly looked very old, very fast. The Dutch weren't sentimental about it either. They came in, took one look, and began trimming the fat. The Roadtrain was one of the first to go. It faded quickly. Production ended in the early 1990s. And just like that, the truck that was meant to revive Leyland's fortunes was gone. A few hung around on British roads, working through their twilight years with smaller firms or in specialist roles. Some were exported, others ended up in scrapyards, and the dream of a British heavy hitter that could rival the best of Europe. That dream died with it. But here's the twist. Not everyone forgot. In fact, over time, the Leyland Roadtrain started to earn a strange kind of respect. Not because it was perfect, but because it tried. It really tried. And in the face of overwhelming odds, it gave a generation of British truckers something to root for. Because that truck, boxy and battered as it might have been, meant something. And if you climbed in today, grabbed that oversized wheel, flipped those chunky switches, and gave the old Cummins a kick, you'd hear it. That unmistakable growl. Not just of an engine, but of ambition. Of a country that once believed it could still build a truck to take on the world. When Leyland merged with DAF in the late 80s, it was meant to be a lifeline, a partnership to breathe new life into British trucking. But for the Roadtrain, it was more like a quiet funeral. The Dutch didn't waste time. They had their own plans, their own cabs, and their own future. And while Leyland's factories kept ticking over, the Roadtrain was quietly pushed aside like a pub regular who'd overstayed his welcome. You see, DAF had just rolled out their new 75 series and were gearing up for the launch of the futuristic 85 and 95 models. These trucks were sleeker, more comfortable, and had better fuel economy than anything Leyland had on offer. They weren't just competing with the Roadtrain, they were light years ahead. So when it came time to decide who stayed and who got the boot, the Roadtrain didn't stand a chance. What really stung wasn't just that the truck was being killed off, it was that nobody really said goodbye. No grand farewell, no final edition with a fancy badge. One day it was in the brochure and the next it wasn't. The truck that was supposed to save British haulage had been erased with the swipe of a pen in a boardroom in Eindhoven. But it didn't disappear overnight. Far from it, road trains kept hauling. You could still find them clattering up the M6, worn down, black smoke coughing out the stack, pulling curtainsiders full of crates or pallets. They weren't glamorous, but they were tough, stubborn, the kind of lorry you could lash back together with a spanner and a roll of tape if it came to it. And that's where the strange affection started to grow. The truck had been overlooked for years, written off as a bit rough round the edges. But over time, people started to realize maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe, in trying to carry Britain's haulage hopes on its square-shouldered frame, it had done better than we gave it credit for. Ask any mechanic who worked on them. The Roadtrain was simple. No weird electronics, no digital this or that. You could strip one down in your own yard if you had the time. The Cummins L10 under the cab was practically indestructible if you looked after it. Sure, the cab creaked a bit and the switches would rattle loose on a bumpy stretch of road, but it had soul. It was a working man's truck, a proper lorry for proper graft. That rugged charm is what's brought a few of them back into the limelight in recent years. At classic lorry shows, they stand proudly between shiny Scanias and restored Atkinsons. And when you hear one start up, that deep, rattly growl, you get goosebumps. Not because it's the fastest or the smoothest or even the most reliable, but because it tried. It really, truly tried. There's something about the Roadtrain's boxy shape that people can't let go of either. It was unapologetically British, all straight lines and sharp corners, none of that aerodynamic, rounded off fluff. It looked like it was built in a shed by a bloke with a ruler and a hammer, and maybe it was, but it worked. It did what it needed to, and it didn't pretend to be anything else. In a way, the Roadtrain is a mirror of Britain's industrial spirit in the 80s, a bit worn out, constantly underestimated, but still fighting, still standing. It didn't win any beauty contests, and it sure as hell didn't win many races. But it hauled freight, kept people in jobs, and kept the wheels turning. Sometimes quite literally, with cable ties holding things together. You had to respect that. Some blokes even drove them well into the 2000s, refusing to give them up. It's not fast, but it will get there, they'd say. And they were right. It wasn't about speed, it was about getting the job done, rain or shine. It was about showing up to a site with a cab that had seen better days, but an engine that still had life in it. Today, the few road trains that survive are kept alive by enthusiasts and collectors who know what they've got. Not just an old truck, not just a bit of British steel and grease, but a symbol of an era, a moment when Britain took a swing at the giants and, for a brief time, landed a few solid punches. Because even though it failed in the end, the Leyland Roadtrain never gave up. It never stopped hauling. It never stopped turning up at depots, yards, and lay-bys up and down the country. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of its diesel heart thumping down the motorway. Proud, stubborn, and undeniably British.